Hello, Personality Individual Differences class. Today we're going to do our first major lecture. We're going to do an introduction to the field of personality. We're going to divide this lecture into four major parts. First, we're going to define what personality is. That seems to be a very important thing. What are we talking about in the entirety of this class? We're also going to look at personality in pop culture. Where do you see the term personality when you are browsing the web, browsing the internet? Where do you see it when you're in the grocery store? Where do you see it in the workplace? Are those good uses of personality or are they bad uses? There's a little bit of both. Then we're going to look at how different personality psychologists conceptualize personality and how they study personality differently than one another. Some researchers in the field of personality take a very wide view of personality and look at how all human beings are similar to one another. They are answering questions about what is human nature. Whereas some personality researchers take a very unique perspective, how a single individual is different than everybody else. So there are many different ways to study personality. This is very different than every other discipline in psychology. In cognitive psychology and social psychology, there are more or less a few specific ways to study what you're interested in that everybody agrees on. In personality, there are dozens of different ways to study personality. Many different ways of studying it, with advantages and disadvantages to each one of those, and nobody can really agree on a single way to study personality. So we're going to look at different levels of personality analysis. Then we're going to move into some major issues that we're going to encounter time and time again in this course. And I figure might as well start off our lectures talking about these issues because we're going to mention them in almost every single lecture from now until the end of the class. What are these themes that we're going to see throughout this class that are going to arise? And lastly, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a teaser of what are some of the questions that we're going to attempt to answer throughout this course. Why take this course? What kind of knowledge are we going to get from it? So just a few questions that we're going to hopefully try to answer throughout this course. So first of all, what do we mean when we talk about personality? What does this word mean? Well, anytime that we're describing somebody, if we're talking about a friend of ours and trying to explain to somebody else what our friend is like, if we're trying to describe what we ourselves, what are some characteristics of ourselves, we're referring to our personality. So if we were to try to explain maybe someone famous like Lady Gaga, how would we describe their personality? So Lady Gaga has a very unique view on life. She's very creative. She is open to new ideas. So this is some aspect of her personality. Not very many people would wear a dress made entirely of meat. But she is a little bit of a soft-spoken individual. She is not very loud, not super confrontational, especially when we compare maybe to another famous celebrity. Here we have Cardi B. So Cardi B, similar to Lady Gaga in many different ways. So they're both creative, they're both open to new experiences, but there are some drastic differences between them in how they behave, whereas Cardi B is much more aggressive than compared to Lady Gaga, for instance. So we use these terms like aggressive, like agreeable. We use terms like open to new experiences. What we're referring to here, we're referring to these individuals we're referring to their personalities. We're referring to their personalities when we're describing the similarities and differences between people. In fact, if we were to view ourselves and try to describe ourselves to other people, we would typically use terms that refer to someone's personality as well. So when we are describing people to one another, we're typically referring to their personality. So let's move on and talk about personality in popular culture. Where do we see personality in our everyday lives? Well, we can find personality in a few places, and the majority of them bad, but we see them in our everyday lives. So good example of this. So If you have ever been to a dating website, one thing that they like to advertise, especially when, this is probably about a decade ago, before pre-tenure, not pre-tenure, pre-Tinder, there we go, pre-Tinder, a lot of these dating websites would make you take a personality test. There, they said, if you want to find true love, what you can do is you take our personality test and then we'll match you with somebody whose personality is similar to yours. So if you go on a date, it's going to be perfect and you will find the love of your life. So here we're using personality. Although the promise of these websites is vastly overstated. So what these websites would do is they would bump up your compatibility. So it really didn't matter what you scored. They would say everybody matched real well for you. So in theory, this is something that might work. These dating websites, of course, did not do a very good job of implementing it, because if you're paying, I don't know, $50 a month to be in chemistry.com or match.com or any one of these dating websites, and it turns out that you match with absolutely no one, you're going to stop putting your money there. So they essentially bump up how much you match with everybody else. But what we're talking about here is a way in which we see personality in popular media and popular culture. So dating websites, still a very big thing. Less so in the Tinder age, but we still see it. Another great example. Many of you have probably heard or have taken the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's a very, very famous personality measure. Many people take it. It, for the longest time, has been the most famous measurement of personality. But the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator puts you into one of 16 different personality types. One of 16 different personality types based on a variety of characteristics. Are you an extrovert or are you an introvert? Are you a judger versus are you a perceiver? And it's a very popular test. A lot of people love to interpret one another. In fact, if you were to go on the internet, you could see all kinds of charts like this one based off of your Myers-Briggs type. What character from Harry Potter are you? What character from Star Wars or Game of Thrones, or you name it. People have gone through and found out just by reading books and things what the Myers-Briggs type of a particular character in a TV show, movie, book, you name it, would be. It's very, very popular. You've probably encountered this or have taken this test yourself. Is this a good measure of personality? That's a completely different question. And it turns out, not really. It is capturing some real dimensions in personality. It's not just doing the best job of this. So you can imagine we put you into either an introvert, somebody that does not enjoy being around a ton of people, or an extrovert. You enjoy being around a ton of people. You like to go to a lot of social events. Well, those are two extreme ends of the perspective. What happens if you're in the middle? Well, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator does not have a type for that. You're either an introvert or you're an extrovert. And enforcing people to either one side or the other side and having no one in the middle creates a lot of problems when we're trying to measure personality. This is something that we're going to encounter in this lecture, in many, many different lectures. Okay, so when we look at personality types that force somebody into either one category or the other, bad things happen for the measurement of personality. But another test that is very, very popular. What are some other examples of personality? Astrology. Oh man, this is a $1 million industry, if you can believe it, of things like horoscopes, of maybe if we find out the month that you were born in, we might be able to tell something about your personality and how you interact with the world. And based off of that, we can tell who you're going to be a good match with. If you're a Sagittarius, are you a good match with a Scorpio? Or are you a better match with a Leo? Again, this kind of sounds crazy. Think about it. The month that you were born in, based off of the stars that are in the sky, somehow they exist some force that changes your personality when you were born. That's kind of weird. I mean, it's not kind of weird, it's very weird. And of course, there's absolutely no truth to this. This has been studied, unfortunately, well, depends on your perspective, unfortunately or fortunately, dozens of times, and the month that you're born in has absolutely no relationship to your personality. Your star sign, your astrological sign, tells us absolutely nothing about your personality, and yet people love, love, love to read their horoscopes, to discuss their personality in terms of their astrological sign. Why is this? We're going to talk a little bit about that in the measurement of personality, but the thing that I want to mention here is taking personality tests is fun. We enjoy discovering something about ourselves. We are intrinsically interested in finding some more information about who we are as a human being. And this is both a great thing because it leads you to be interested in a class such as this, and leads you to on the path of self-discovery, which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing sometimes. It leads people to buy into ideas or expend their economic resources, pay money for personality assessments that do not work, that are a waste of time, that have no scientific merit to them whatsoever, when they could be paying their money towards other things that actually do work. So if you're trying to determine who do you need to marry, who do you want to go on a date with, and your astrological sign does a horrible job of predicting this, and yet people spend money and try to interpret things. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of economic resources. Another example of this, BuzzFeed polls. Okay, you've probably taken a few BuzzFeed quizzes in your time. I know I have. Heck, I'm a scientist, and I still enjoy these things. So what Disney princess are you? I always want to get Belle from Beauty and the Beast, but I always get Ariel from Little Mermaid. I hate that, dang it. But you can do all kinds of polls like this, okay? What Game of Thrones character are you? What Star Wars character are you? There's plenty of polls out there, plenty of quizzes. Mind you, you probably have a good idea that these are complete BS, but they're fun. Okay, we encounter these things because they are fun. And we enjoy taking them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just if you're using what Disney princess are to you to make a decision about whether or not you should be hired for a job, that is not a good approach to take. So we encounter many different personality tests in popular culture when we're surfing the web. Another thing that I want to mention, we'll mention this here and then I will drop this from all conversation. There is this big idea in a lot of criminal TV shows or investigative TV shows about criminal profiling, and it's a popular field. So the idea behind criminal profiling is that if we know something about the crime that has been committed, well, this serial killer has killed this many people, and it was a clean crime, or it was a dirty crime, or it was a crime of passion, we are able to tell something about the characteristics of that criminal. And this may or may not help the police in trying to apprehend an individual. We can think of all kinds of TV shows where this is a big, big idea and the premise of the show. So shows like Criminal Minds. If I had a nickel for every time someone told me to watch Criminal Minds, I would be a very rich man. And while the show does take some principles from psychology, it's like somebody took one general psychology class and they get like 30% of the way there and then they say something else that's crazy, and it's a very, very infuriating show for me to watch. The whole point is they're trying to capture these serial killers or whatever, and that based off of how the crime is committed, they're able to determine it's a white guy that has problems with his mom, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's some other shows like this, for instance, Hannibal. In fact, this field of criminal profiling really became a very big deal after the movie Silence of the Lambs, where we see Hannibal Lecter helping the police in catching criminals. Another TV show which I enjoy more, but again, not necessarily based on science, is Mindhunter on Netflix. So all these shows, and many of you have probably encountered the idea of criminal profiling and might think that we're going to talk a lot about criminal profiling in this class. Who is more likely to commit a crime? Well, we are going to talk about who's more likely to commit a crime, but we're not going to look at the evidence of the crime and try to discover who it is. Okay. And why is that? Well, as it turns out, Criminal profiling really isn't a science. There's no real data to back it up. Criminal profiling, if we analyze the field, does not do a better job than chance of picking out who is going to be the criminal. And even though the FBI employs many criminal profilers, again, they do no better than a layperson. You or I, not knowing anything about crime, can do just as good of a job predicting who's going to be the criminal compared to anybody else. And in fact, sometimes these criminal profiles are very harmful. We want the police to apprehend the culprit of a crime, someone that's a murderer, and turns out that we've given them wrong information, so they don't look at potential leads. So criminal profiling, at least as of right now, is a pseudoscience. There's no research to back it up and its effectiveness. That doesn't stop the FBI or many many police offices to use criminal profilers. But again, there is nothing that says that this works. I mean, there's some police offices that go to psychics to help with crimes as well. I mean, not that many, but it has been known to happen. All bad ways to catch a criminal. So no research to back that up. So that is unfortunate, but that's just the case. So we're not going to talk about it because it's not scientific. Okay, there's no research to back up this discipline. So sorry to burst your bubble, those of you that are fans of Criminal Minds. So what is personality? So personality comes from the Latin persona. Persona literally means masks. Back in the ancient Roman theater, ancient Greek theater, what you would do if you wanted to convey a certain emotion, you would put on a particular mask. So you can have these famous comedy and tragedy masks here to convey certain emotions. So personality is, we can think of it, comes from the root of the kind of emotional expression that you have on your face throughout your typical day. So how would we define personality in this class in psychology? So personality is someone's usual, typical, characteristic pattern of behavior, feelings, and thoughts. So there's two important things of this definition that we want to pay attention to. First of all, someone's usual, someone's typical, someone's characteristics. We're not talking about how you are today. We go to a funeral and we see that someone's sad. Does this mean they're normally a sad person? No, it's a funeral. People are sad at funerals. So just a one-off thing, okay? If I went to somebody and I kicked them in the shin and they got mad at me, I wouldn't say that that was an angry person, because everybody that if you randomly kick them in the shin is going to be an angry person. So we're looking at someone's typical, usual characteristic of usual pattern of behavior, feelings, and thoughts. So not just are you angry now after I kick you in the shin, but if we look over the course of a year, you are in more instances you are angry compared to another individual. Okay, so your characteristic, your usual, your typical pattern of behavior, feelings and thoughts. So not just at a specific instance, because everybody sometimes is happy, everybody sometimes is sad, everybody sometimes tries new things, but over a large period of time, how many of those instances, how many of those behaviors have you done? How often do you feel that certain emotion? How often do you have this particular thought? So that's part one of this definition. The other part of this definition is that personality resides in a wide variety of different characteristics of psychology. So we're looking at someone's behavior. Okay, maybe we look at how many parties they attend to. This might give us some indication of how extroverted the individual is. So how many social events does that person engage in? How many times does that person get into a fist fight with somebody else? How many times does that person get on a roller coaster? All these behaviors might tell us something about someone's personality. So behavior. Also, we have feelings, so someone's emotional expression. How often does someone cry? How often does someone experience sadness or depression? How often does someone experience anxiety? How often does someone experience anger? So someone's emotions tell us something about their personality. And again, this is someone's typical range of emotions. On average, what is their emotional expression? So we might look at something like anxiety for a test. Not just this one test, but across a wide variety of tests. Are you the kind of person that experiences a lot of anxiety? Maybe this tells us something about your level of neuroticism. So we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at feelings, and we're looking at thoughts. So we're looking at cognition. Are you the kind of person that thinks that things are always going to end out positively? So you're a very optimistic person. And typically you have an optimistic viewpoint. Well, that tells us something about your personality versus if you're a more pessimistic person, then everything is going to be a problem. Are you the kind of person that attributes all of your successes to you? Okay, if you did well in the test, why? Because you're awesome and you're a genius and you're amazing. And anything that bad happens in your life, well, that's not you, it's due to everybody else. I didn't succeed because you messed me up. The professor was mean to me, or something along those lines. Okay, do you typically attribute good things to yourself, bad things to other people? So kind of a self-serving bias. If you've taken social psychology, if you have that kind of self-serving bias compared to other people, that tells us something about your personality. What is your cognition, your thoughts, typically? So this is our definition of personality. So a related term that we're going to talk about umpteen million times in this course is a personality trait or a psychological trait. So when we refer to a trait in psychology, we're referring to characteristics that describe ways in which people differ from one another. That's the definition that I have here. We don't come up with personality traits or psychological traits to talk about how all human beings are the same. Okay, every human being needs oxygen. We don't come up with a word like oxyphilic, so the love of oxygen, to describe differences among people, because we all need oxygen the same amount. But people differ in how often they want to be around other people. They differ in how angry they typically are, how aggressive they are. They differ in how organized they are. So for ways in which human beings differ from one another, we create terms in our language. And these terms refer to someone's personality traits. They're psychological traits. So we'll talk a lot about different conceptualizations of these personality traits, but I'm just going to leave this for right here. The study of personality, we can do it many different ways. One very influential way that we're going to look at throughout this class is the trait approach. We're going to find out how many of these personality traits are there within human beings, which ones are meaningful, and what do these personality traits correlate with? Maybe extroversion is correlated with how well you do a job, maybe in leadership. Okay, turns out to be much more complicated than that, but maybe there's that relationship. So that's what the trait approach is all about. So some examples of some personality traits are, for instance, extroversion and introversion. This is the primary example of personality, and we're going to use this term and study it throughout the remainder of this course. But typically when we're referring to extroversion and introversion, think of a definition, at least for right now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, is how sociable a person is. So are you someone that enjoys being out in a crowd of people? You like to be the center of attention? You enjoy a lot of social events? Or perhaps you are more reserved. You don't enjoy as many social events. Okay, we can think of personality traits as someone's average tendencies. On average, how does the person typically behave? A misconception about extroversion, we'll at least talk about this right now, is that people that are introverted do not like social events. No, that's not the case. People that are introverted do like social events. It's just that they don't enjoy as many of them. They get more tired in social events. Let me give you an example. Many times in this class, I'm going to describe my personality because I know myself pretty well, and then I'm going to describe my wife's personality because on many things we differ from one another, especially in extroversion and introversion. My wife, extremely extroverted. Tyler, very introverted. So we had recently traveled to Columbia, South Carolina, driven the 3.5 hours for Thanksgiving. And we spent a lot of time with my family who lives in Columbia, South Carolina. And we spent the entire day there, and we traveled all the way back, 3.5 hours, and we arrive back in Atlanta, where we were living at the time. And we're both really, really exhausted. And my wife turns to me and she says, "Hey, I'm going to hang out with some of my friends right now. Do you want to do that?" And I look at her like she's crazy. No, we've spent the entire day with people. Why would I'm exhausted. Why would I want to hang out with more people? That is tiring for me as an introvert. Whereas my wife is very energized by social events. That's how she gets her energy back. So even though my wife and I both enjoy social events, for me, it is more taxing as someone that's more introverted compared to my wife. Much more about extroversion and introversion later. Neuroticism. Neuroticism has to do with how much negative emotion someone experiences, how much depression they experience, how much anxiety they experience. The way that I typically like to think about this is, let's say that you're walking to class or you're doing something in a social realm, and all of a sudden you trip and fall. Now, everybody trips and falls. It happens. Someone that is low in neuroticism is going to trip and fall, and they might think, "Dang, I'm a klutz." And then later on in the day, they're not going to think about it at all. At lunchtime, they're not going to think about it. In the evening, they're not going to think about it. Whereas someone that's high in neuroticism, they're going to trip and fall, and they're going to think, "Dang, I'm an idiot." And then at lunch, they're going to think, "Dang, I'm an idiot." And in the afternoon, they're going to think, "Dang, I'm an idiot." And that idea of them falling is going to perseverate. They're going to ruminate. They're going to think about that negative experience for a much longer period of time than someone that's lower in neuroticism. Again, more about neuroticism later, just giving you some introductions to some traits right now. Last one I want to introduce, conscientiousness. Now, if you are like any students that I've had in the past, you're going to think, "Oh, conscientiousness, this has to do with how conscientious a person is. Are they a nice, thoughtful individual that gives me meaningful gifts?" This is not what conscientiousness means. Let's get that out of the head right now. Conscientiousness has to do with how organized and hardworking an individual is. So are you an individual that can multitask, an individual that works very hard and diligent at your job? You put in the long hours to get things done. You're very organized. Or are you an individual that is a procrastinator? You're more lazy. Your room is a wreck. So this has to do with the personality trait of conscientiousness. Conscientious is referring to a different personality trait. Are you a nice individual? Okay, which we might call agreeableness. All right. So those are some examples that we might use to talk about differences between other human beings. All right. Let's move on and talk about different levels of personality analysis. Different personality researchers are going to examine personality at many different levels. Perhaps let's think about a theoretical microscope. Okay, and are we looking at a single individual, or are we looking at a group of individuals to study? So a conceptualization that I really like to use is that of Colquhoun and Murray in 1948. Okay, Murray is going to be an important name in the history of personality. This is Henry Murray. So we're going to talk a decent amount about Henry Murray. He's one of the first individuals that started the empirical or scientific study of personality. So personality psychologists can study how personality is, how human beings are like every other human being. So these are questions about human nature. We can look at how personality and how all human beings are similar to some others, but different from others. So we can ask questions about individual and group differences. And we can look at how human beings are different from everybody else. So we can look at someone's individual uniqueness. Why are you special, as Barney the dinosaur used to say? I don't know if that's before you guys' time, but Barney in my day taught that everybody was special. So why are we all special? Why are we unique compared to everybody else? So we can study these different things. We can study how human beings are all the same, questions of human nature. This is what individuals like Sigmund Freud is going to try to address. We could look at how people differ from one another. So maybe we can look at these personality traits that we've talked about. So how do some people, are they different in extroversion, and what extroversion is correlated with? We might look at group differences. And we can look at individual uniqueness. Let's go a little bit into more detail here. So first, how are all human beings like one another? These are questions in personality about human nature. Human nature, what personality traits, what mechanisms, how are all human beings similar to one another? And there's many research studies out there that try to address this. Okay, how are all human beings similar to one another? Maybe like Aristotle said, scoot forward a little bit, man is by nature a political animal. Sometimes this is translated, man is by nature a social animal. Humans are a very social species. We have evolved to be a very social species that relies on one another, and we are very attuned to the emotional expressions, the feelings and thoughts of other people. We're very communicative. We use a lot of communication with other human beings. So maybe one ways in which human beings are all similar to one another is we all are very social for the most part. Okay, maybe human beings are similar to one another, that we all need this social interaction. We all have this capacity to love other individuals. Maybe we have this need for self-esteem or need to belong, and that's similar across all human beings. Another good example of this, and I will drop this into the optional videos, is the research by Harry Harlow. Harry Harlow, a researcher. Ooh, was he from Minnesota or Michigan? That's not important for you guys. That's something I'm going to Google right after this lecture. But somewhere up there, Harry Harlow was doing research with rhesus monkeys. And the popular notion at the time was that human beings in orphanages, the only thing that they needed to survive was food. And so the orphanages would give them their food, they would teach them, but no one would touch the orphans. No one would hug them, no one would cuddle them. And all of a sudden, these orphans, raised in this environment, turned out to be very, very aggressive. They had a lot of social problems. They were really very maladjusted to life. And so this was odd. So what are we doing wrong? We're giving them the food, we're giving them teaching. What are they missing out on? So Harry Harlow did some research with rhesus monkeys, my apologies. Rhesus monkeys, in which he deprived these rhesus monkeys from their mother. So they were born, they were immediately taken away from their mother. This is not a very ethical thing to do. We wouldn't do this research nowadays. But he would remove them from their mother and would show that how maladjusted these monkeys were if they didn't have this creature comfort of being able to touch their mother when they were being raised as baby monkeys, of toddler monkeys, of child monkeys. And he also showed that in a series of experiments, he has these rhesus monkeys raised with two mothers, not real mothers, but quote unquote fake mothers. One is a mother that is made of wire, that has food, water, not food. And the other monkey mother is a terry cloth mother, so she doesn't provide any nutrients, but she feels nice. So which of these mothers is the rhesus monkey going to gravitate towards? What rhesus monkey is this, which mother is this rhesus monkey baby going to hold on to for the vast majority of time? And it turns out that the rhesus monkey needs this creature comfort of just touching something that's familiar, that's soft. So we learned a lot from these kind of studies that human beings in orphanages across the world, they don't just need food. They don't just need education. They need love from a parental figure. It's very important for a well-adjusted human being. And even though Harry Harlow's research was unethical and not very nice to these rhesus monkeys, and we would have a problem with this nowadays, it did show us a lot of importance and led to some dramatic changes in the child care system, especially for orphans. Okay, so that's human nature, asking questions about how all human beings are similar in terms of their personality. Individual and group differences. I would say that the majority of time in this class, this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time. So how are all human beings how are human beings different from one another? So we can talk about individual differences in these personality traits. Maybe some individuals are extroverted, some individuals are introverted, some individuals are agreeable versus not agreeable. What are these personality traits? What are they correlated with? These are things that we're going to try to address. And we can also look at group differences. Maybe something that we'll encounter in this class. How do men and women differ in their personalities? Are there huge differences in personality? Turns out not to be very big differences, some differences, but very small. And how men and women differ from one another in their personalities. But here we're looking at group differences. How does someone that's raised in a Western society differ in personality from someone that's raised in an Eastern society? We'll tackle this question as well. How does someone that's raised in America or UK or Germany differ in their personality from someone raised in something like India or China or Japan? So this is the level of group differences. How do the people's personalities differ across the world? The last level is that of individual uniqueness. This is a very interesting way and often neglected way of studying personality. So this way of studying personality, what we do is we take a single individual, think of it kind of like a case study, and we talk about how that individual got to be the person that they are today. A good example of this is some biographies of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, the quintessential Renaissance man. He was an artist, he was an inventor, he knew a lot about biology, very, very smart guy, very, very wide breadth of knowledge. So why did Leonardo da Vinci develop to be the kind of human being that he was? Well, there's many people that write biographies. There's a word for that. I'm blanking on the term, but people that write biographies have written about Leonardo da Vinci, and they've tried to, based off of his early life, explain how he developed to be the person that he did. In fact, Sigmund Freud wrote a very colorful, as Sigmund Freud is known to do, account of Leonardo da Vinci's life. So based off of his relationship with his mother and his father, based off of his early education, Leonardo da Vinci developed to be the kind of man that he was. Okay, this is an individual uniqueness approach here. We are taking the circumstances of one person and talking about how they developed to be the person that they are today. Okay, it's much more difficult to be scientific about these kind of studies, but there are ways to do that. Another example of this, any kind of biography. So here we have a biography by Ron Chernow. This is the biography that inspired Lin-Manuel Miranda to write the musical Hamilton, which, by the way, is out on Disney Plus. There we go. Right now, I haven't watched it yet, but I am very excited to do so. So the biography here, Alexander Hamilton, one of the founders of this country, very, very influential person for our country's history. Why did Hamilton end up becoming a great individual? I mean, if we look at his early life, his mother passed away when he was very, very young, but we can see from this biography, what Ron Chernow tries to do is we explain the hardships of Alexander Hamilton's early life and how that led him to the ideas about how the country should function later on in his life. So anytime we try to do something like that, try to account for the reason why someone is the way that they are based off of all of the events that they've encountered early on in life, why that individual is great or not great or however they are. We're looking at personality through the eyes of individual uniqueness. Why is that individual different from everybody else? Okay. So there are many different ways to teach a personality class. And I have a particular way, and it's not the exact way that if you had this class with Dr. Halliburton or Dr. Hill might teach this class. There's many, many different ways. In fact, how this class was taught at Georgia Tech, where I went to graduate school, is completely different than how I'm going to teach this class. Typically, there are two different approaches to this class. I'm generalizing a little bit, but let's say two major approaches. One approach is a very historic approach that focuses on the grand theories of personality. So the grand theories approach to personality, we look at all of these major theorists from way back in the early 1900s. So we look at Sigmund Freud, we look at Carl Jung, we look at Alfred Adler, and we talk about all of their theories, how they are similar to one another, how they are different from one another, and we pretty much end the course in the 1950s. So these theories try to explain everything there is to do in personality. They try to explain 100% of why someone behaves the way that they do. So for Freud, as you probably are aware, the major driving force in all human beings has to do with sex. Freud argued a few different things, for instance, the death instinct, thanatos, which we'll talk a little bit about later on in this class. But the major driving force for all of human behavior is sex, according to Freud. So that he's trying to explain all of human behavior based off of a few different drives, a few different motivational forces within human beings. So they're trying to explain everything there is in personality, which is a very big goal. They were trying to explain how personality develops from when you are a baby to when you are an adult. Now, these theories are very grand in scope. Their job is very, very massive. But a lot of times these researchers are not using science. Well, I shouldn't call them researchers. These theorists are not using science. They're not looking at scientific data. They're using their own clinical practice. They're using their own intuition. And we'll see this a few different times. So that's one major approach to personality. We can look at all of these grand theories and explain their differences, how they're similar to one another. But this is not very scientific. These individuals are relying on intuition. They're relying on their gut. They're not really looking at what data actually tells us. So we will talk a decent amount about these grand theories of personality, particularly in Module 4, when we talk about psychodynamic theories of personality. But that's not all that we're going to do. Some classes, this is it. That's all you do. You talk about just the personality theories and you talk about nothing else. That's not the approach that we're going to take in this class. Okay. Another approach that we can do in teaching personality, we could look at more modern personality research. We could look at research, period, right? We can look at some scientific studies of personality. Okay, so we could focus more on contemporary personality research. And this is what we're going to do, right? We're going to focus a lot on trait theories of personality. We're going to focus a lot on the biology of personality. We're going to talk about the social psychology and the cognitive psychology of personality. We're going to talk a lot about how personality is related to physical health, how it's related to mental health, how it's related to the workplace. We're going to talk a lot about the science of personality, not just personality theories. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in grand theories of personality land, spend a lot of time in contemporary personality research land. One more thing that we're talking about, here's just some books. Very good books here and journals for studying personality. So this Handbook of Personality is a really great resource if ever you wanted to buy a more advanced book on personality. Okay, one more level of personality analysis that I want to talk about. So there are two major ways that we can do research. And these are two different ways that have been popularized by a famous psychologist, Gordon Allport. And I have bolded Gordon Allport's name because he's somebody that I want you to know. Gordon Allport wrote one of the first textbooks on personality psychology. That really spurned the scientific discipline of personality, the empirical discipline of personality. He wrote that book in 1937 or 1938, one of those dates. But he's also the one that came up with the term personality trait, so very influential guy. And Gordon Allport stated that there's two major approaches to doing research. There's the nomothetic approach and there's the ideographic approach, which are really cool words that would impress somebody at a dinner party. But what do I mean by nomothetic and ideographic research? Nomothetic research, nomothetic approach to research. We are doing research in which we have a population that we're interested in. Maybe it's all human beings, maybe it's all students at UNG, maybe it is all men, whatever our population is. We want to find out some characteristic of that population. So we can't measure everybody in that population because that's too many people. So we sample, I got to use a subset from that population. We study that sample, we conduct an experiment, and based off of the results of that sample, we generalize to the entire population. That is nomothetic research. We're trying to uncover laws that in psychology that are common to all human beings. How all human beings are similar to one another. We can think of our study of human nature being very similar to this nomothetic approach to research. Okay, that's one way of doing research. If you are a psychology major or have studied psychology, I'd say about 95% of the time, psychologists are in nomothetic approach to research land. Okay, we typically take this approach to psychology. In fact, all the statistics that you learn, the majority of research methods that you learn are from the nomothetic approach. There's a lot of advantages to this approach. But we don't want to neglect the other approach, and this is the idiographic approach to research. Okay, the idiographic approach to research, we can think of it as being similar to studying someone's individual uniqueness. What we are doing is we are doing case studies. We're looking at what makes an individual unique. We're looking at their life narrative. Okay, how do they conceptualize their life? First, I encountered this problem, then I encountered this other problem, and that made me the man or woman I am today. So what we might do, an example of an idiographic approach to research, we've got our good friend Harry Potter here. Harry Potter starts off the series of Harry Potter books being a very timid, shy, dorky kid, and he ends up being a hero. So what happens across those 7 books that leads Harry Potter to become a hero, become a more brave individual? We can look at the circumstances of his life. Maybe we can talk about the rule of his mentors, maybe Dumbledore, maybe Hagrid, and causing him to develop as a human being. And mind you, that's mentors and not dementors. Aha! Wonderful Harry Potter joke that no one gets to laugh at because I'm lecturing to a computer. But I hope you laughed at that. If you didn't get the joke, that's fine too. Okay, so where was I? We were talking about Harry Potter and the idiographic approach to research. So looking at his mentors, looking at his life experience, we are able to tell something about how he ended up developing to be a more brave individual later on in that series of books. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler. All right, let's pause right here and I will start the next lecture in the next video. Okay, I hope to see you guys there, or well, I won't really see you, but you get the point. See you guys in a bit.